It was a game that was created by Tezuo Kano and developed by Sega Hitmaker. The game was created as sort of a humor toward the game industry in Japan and the decline of Sega itself. In the game, the lead creator, Segataro, is tasked with saving Sega from its competitor Dogma, which in real life was actually Sony and their PlayStation. It was a game that was a full-on parody, even when things were looking very bleak for Sega's console division. So how exactly was it that this game came into existence? On this edition of the Uncommon Valley, we look at who exactly came up with this idea for the bizarrely strange story for such a video game, known as Segagaga for the Sega Dreamcast. Hitmaker Co. Limited, better known as Sega Hitmaker, was once a gaming powerhouse. They were active from the year 2000 all the way to 2004, a period during which they made a whole lot of games whose characters became household names. Among their hit games were Crazy Taxi, Virtual On, Sega Rally, and Virtual Tennis. The team's development efforts were focused on making arcade games for the Sega Dreamcast platform. The team was just one of Sega's many development companies which were later decentralized into their own semi-anonymous companies, but still under the Sega umbrella. Efforts were still on Dreamcast, and games such as World Club Champion Football, Derby Owners Club, and The Key of Avalon are some of the more successful games that came from Sega at that time. Hitmaker was one of Sega's most successful teams, however, and its director at the time was exploring opportunities as he was given the nod to explore beyond video games. His experience building on his own, but in the company, would later be necessary for the making of Segagaga. His experience and knowledge in creating games people love outgrew Hitmaker warranting a promotion to Sega, but it didn't take long when Hitmaker as a company was fused with Sega to become one entity. Sayo Uguchi, who was president at the time when Segagaga was pitched, joined Sega at a time when they had a single R&D team tasked with working on arcade and video games, even going as far as to go back in 1984, where he played a critical role in creating Sega Master System and also helped build the first game for the console, Doki Doki Penguin. Oguchi was instrumental in other games and played the role of director in Super Derby, Rad Mobile, and Super Monaco GP. After overseeing so many games, Oguchi became president of Sega in 2003. He immediately decided to consolidate all of the many Sega studios and merge Sega Russo to create Hitmaker, which was later fused with Sega by itself. By then, Hitmaker had overseen the development of so many titles, and they had even built a solid resume of game development experiences and skills that were used in creating Segagaga. Tezuo Kano, who would be the director for the Segagaga project, was part of Hitmaker itself, and would also explain where he got the numerous skills from when he played roles in creating titles like Dragon Ball Z VRVS in 1993 and Rail Chase 2 in 1994, where he was a character designer. Even though majority of the titles that were under the Hitmaker brand were all given the green light with massive approval, one idea that would be proposed originally was thought of as a big joke, but would become one of Sega's most interesting titles ever developed. When Tezuo Kano pitched the idea to the Sega executives, they all had a very good long laugh and it sort of ended off as a success. So they indeed had the shock of their life when Tezuo Kano returned to tell them that the pitch was for a real project, and they had plans to make it into a real game. He then proceeded to ask for funding to make the game happen. But who would fund such an idea about how their company was dying and couldn't do much about it? Interestingly, the Sega executives eventually obliged to his demands. Oguchi liked the idea, and somehow was impressed even though they all laughed off the idea at the first try. Okana took the funds and proceeded to work on the project underground, with only 2 years of developing the game in secret. Back in the boardroom, Okana would unveil the first full build of the game to the other executives. Needless to say, it didn't go well. The game had many problems, including what was estimated over 300 development issues. The problems in some instances meant that the game characters had to be removed from the final build of the game. During the purge of characters, certain characters that were lost in the build were the Ferrari from Outrun and the former Japanese Sega Saturn mascot Segata Sanshiro. The main source of the character inspiration for the game was the Sega franchise itself, and many household names it had created such as Alex Kidd, Bad Brothers, Amigo from Samadeo Amigo, Astal, and Sonic the Hedgehog. Among the major problems was whether the game would have a negative effect on the dying Sega brand, even though many believe that the game wouldn't affect the company overall. The game was received as a parody that sought to lighten the mood in a time where Sega was not doing well in the console market. The purpose of the game was not to destroy the gaming industry, but it was a way to poke fun at it overall. Most hardcore Sega fans in Japan deciphered the code, giving their intimate understanding at the Japanese work culture and how the gaming industry operated. But as to whether the game would destroy Sega's image was only part of the puzzle. The second was the fact that the project was an unknown one meant that it was extremely difficult to maintain it as a secret overall. Once again, Okada had to improvise in regards to his experience as a mangaka, or known as a comic book artist, and had to suppress the urge to seek professional help in getting the game designed. Not even Sega's own employees. Okada once again prevailed. The 300 issues that were in the first build of the game were then fixed. At the moment, it is right to say Iguchi was his very own team. He supervised everything from sound to graphics to even marketing the game when it was completed. With him being his own one-man crew, he was essentially a one-man operating like an octopus with 8 hands, which would end up dropping the issues down to only 100. Some of the things we missed in the original game, as stated earlier, Segata Sanshiro was going to be featured in the game's opening cutscene, and it would unfortunately get cut out in the final build of the game. It couldn't be added to the commercial version due to copyright issues, as Sega couldn't secure the necessary rights to use it, so something had to be done about that, and the character was then changed to Get Bass Fishing. While Sega was not exactly a company of ideas, but it was rather more of an amusement technology space. This helped him to design a game that was far more than other games with a bigger budget similar to games like Shenmue. Okada did know something that the entire company didn't. He knew that in order to make it a hit, the idea was virtually a monopoly and nobody would make such a game itself, which made it the perfect no-competition game of its kind. Gucci also knew that he needed a lot of licenses for the game to be a hit. He was an individual with the perfect idea, but was almost crippled by a lack of resources to make the game come to life. Then it hit him, by using Sega's own big names as part of the game. After all, they were free and a good number of them were already household names. That was Iguchi's light bulb moment. The story of the game was pretty simple. Unlike other games where you had to attack various monsters and people, Segagaga was a little different. Its story was metafictional and combined real-world narrative of Sega, the gaming industry, and various Sega hit characters. The game is set in the year 2025, when Sega, the game maker, is in a serious crisis. They are marginalized in the gaming market and left with only 3% of the industry. Their biggest competitor, Dogma, who in real life was Sony, and the 97% hold of the market. Sega is on the verge of collapse, and it is up to the key player, Segataro, to save the company by utilizing the development team and helping them meet the deadline. But Sega does not only employ Segataro, he also has a companion known as Yayoi Haneda. They are tasked with creating a game that people love. Ironically, they are supposed to unite the teams by hurling insult till their will meters drop to 0, and they kowtow to the demands of the directors. When you see the name Segagaga, you will be tempted to think that it is some sort of Japanese term with such a profound meaning. But according to the game's creator, the title has no attached meaning whatsoever. It's just a bunch of words as its own title. It was, however, suggested that he includes Sega in the title, but Okada didn't think that it was as cool of an idea and decided to go another route. He wrote 2 potential names in his memo notes, which were Sega Sega and Segagaga, to make sure the Sega factor was not too intrusive in its name. It was then decided that they would go with Segagaga instead. Segagaga would make its official debut on March 29, 2001, given a budget of only $200. Okada spent the majority of that money securing a wrestler's mask in order to help promote the game. And it wasn't just him. In order for him to help get the word out, Sega head of public relations, Tadashi Takazaki, and Tokusatsu Hara, who was a Sega AM3 employee. The game itself did impressively well for the first few weeks of launch, selling over 34,000 copies from the time of its debut. The main strategy from the beginning was to sell it on the Sega Online store called the Sega Direct. It has since been applauded by various industry players, including Sega's very own official Dreamcast magazine, which they commended it as a good sense of humor and interesting game plot. Segagaga was a defining game that caught the hearts of Sega's fans in Japan. However, it never got much of a chance to be experienced by other countries around the world. This was in part due to it being released at a terrible time, just 2 days before Sega Dreamcast went dark in the 31st of March, causing Sega to go out of the hardware business altogether and would strictly become a third-party developer for all platforms. The game may not have been enjoyed by many hands, but it somehow managed to build a good fan base for those who loved intense humor, style, and gameplay. Today, the game is seen as a work of genius that died before its time. While we've had certain games that never would have gotten imported over to the West, Segagaga will forever remain as a what-if scenario for a game that we never got to see stateside. If there's one thing to remember Segagaga by, it's to remember as a game that best represented Sega at that time. Check out the other videos on our channel today for more obscure video gaming history, and thank you for watching The Uncommon Valley as we look to the past into the present.